She called him 17 times. 17 desperate calls while their 4-year-old son gasped for his last breath, his small hands clutching at his throat, his lips turning blue in the darkness. He saw every single one. He read her messages. He watched the word emergency flash across his screen, and then he silenced his phone, pulled another woman closer, and went back to sleep. His son's last word was, "Daddy." But Daddy never came. What happens next will shock you. Because the broken mother he left behind, she was not just a housewife. She was a former corporate litigator with a father who spent 30 years in military intelligence. And when she discovered the truth about her husband, about his mistress, about the web of lies they had built around her, she did not cry. She did not beg. She planned. This is the story of how one grieving mother and her father systematically destroyed everyone who betrayed her family. And trust me, by the end, you will be cheering. Stay with me until the final moment. This one is worth it. And if this story moves you, if it makes you feel something real, I would be so grateful if you hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss another journey like this one. Now let us begin. 3 months earlier, on a cold December morning in Manhattan, the December wind cut across the Manhattan cemetery like a blade, slicing through black coats and numbing exposed skin. Elena Crawford stood at the front of the gathered mourners, her face composed, her eyes drawn, her posture rigid as marble. She wore a stunning black dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, not a strand out of place. To anyone watching, she appeared to be the picture of dignified grief. But inside, something far more dangerous than grief was burning. The minister's words floated past her like smoke, meaningless syllables about eternal rest and God's mysterious plan. Elena had stopped believing in God's plan 3 months ago, on a December night much colder than this one, when her 4-year-old son took his last breath while his father was too busy with his mistress to answer the phone. Now, standing at her own orchestrated funeral scene, Elena allowed herself a small, private smile. Not a smile of happiness, but of completion, of justice finally served. Her voice echoed in her mind, the words she had rehearsed during countless sleepless nights. They say grief makes you do crazy things, but grief did not make me do what I did. Betrayal did. And the people who destroyed my family learned too late that I am my father's daughter. And my father does not forgive. The minister finished speaking. Mourners began to disperse, murmuring condolences Elena did not hear. Her eyes found 2 specific faces in the crowd, both conspicuously absent, both now wearing orange jumpsuits in federal facilities hundreds of miles apart. Brad Crawford, 15 years. Sloane Hartley, 47 years. Justice, finally. But that was now. To understand how Elena Crawford went from broken, gaslit housewife to the woman who systematically destroyed everyone who hurt her family, we need to go back. Back to a morning that seemed ordinary. Back to a life that seemed perfect on the surface but was rotting from within. 3 months earlier, the December morning was gray and bitter, the kind of cold that seeped through walls and settled into bones. Elena Crawford moved through her cramped Manhattan kitchen with the exhausted efficiency of a woman running on fumes and maternal instinct. Her son Evan sat at the small breakfast table, his 4-year-old frame dwarfed by the portable heart monitor strapped to his chest. Wires snaked beneath his dinosaur pajamas, connecting him to a device that beeps softly, steadily, a mechanical heartbeat monitoring his fragile organic one. Elena set a plate of cut-up pancakes in front of him, forcing a smile despite the dark circles under her eyes, despite the unwashed hair she had twisted into a messy bun, despite the same gray sweatshirt she had been wearing for 3 days. "There you go, sweetheart," she said. "Your favorite, dinosaur shapes." Evan poked at a stegosaurus-shaped pancake with his fork. "Thanks, Mommy." Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Brad Crawford entered the kitchen like a man who owned the world and resented having to acknowledge anyone else in it. His suit probably cost $3,000. His watch was worth more than their monthly medical bills. His cologne was new, different, something Elena did not recognize. He did not look at Evan. He barely looked at Elena. His eyes were fixed on his phone, thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. Elena watched him for a moment, cataloging the details she had been trained to ignore. The way he angled his body away from them, the slight smile at whatever message he was reading, the complete absence of warmth when his eyes briefly flicked toward his chronically ill son. His cardiology appointment is at 2, Elena said carefully. Will you be there this time? Brad did not look up. The Henderson deal closes today. I cannot just drop everything because of a routine checkup. Because your son needs you? Now he looked at her. His eyes were cold, the warmth she remembered from their early years together long since extinguished. Someone has to pay for his treatments, Elena. Or did you forget you have not worked in 4 years? The words landed like a slap. Elena absorbed them silently, the way she had learned to absorb everything Brad threw at her. She had given up her career as a corporate litigator to care for their sick child. She had sacrificed her identity, her income, her independence, and he used it as a weapon against her. Brad grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. He did not kiss Elena goodbye. He did not kiss Evan goodbye. He did not even acknowledge the small boy watching him with confused, hopeful eyes. "Daddy?" Evan called out. Brad paused at the door, annoyance flickering across his handsome face. "What? Will you come to my appointment today?" The doctor said he might have good news. For a moment, something almost human passed through Brad's expression. Almost. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of impatience. "We will see, buddy. Daddy is very busy." He left. The door clicked shut behind him with a sound of finality. Evan's small shoulders slumped. He poked at his pancakes again, no longer interested in eating. "Mommy?" His voice was so small, so fragile. "Why does not Daddy like me?" Elena's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She crossed the kitchen quickly, kneeling beside her son's chair and gathering him gently into her arms, mindful of the wires and monitors. "Daddy loves you, sweetheart. He is just busy. His work is very important, and he has to take care of a lot of things. But he loves you very much." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. But what else could she tell a 4-year-old? That his father resented his existence? That Brad saw Evan's illness not as a tragedy to face together, but as an inconvenience that ruined his perfect life image? Evan nodded against her shoulder, accepting her words with the trusting faith of a child who still believed his mother could fix anything. "I love you, Mommy," he whispered. Elena held him tighter, breathing in the scent of his baby shampoo, feeling his small heart beating against hers. "I love you too, baby, more than anything in the whole world." She did not know then that she had less than 12 hours left with him. The hospital waiting room was painted in shades of institutional beige, the walls decorated with cheerful posters featuring cartoon animals that seemed obscene in a place where children came to fight for their lives. Elena sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, Evan on her lap, his head resting against her chest. They had been waiting for 45 minutes. The chair beside her was empty. A nurse walked past, clipboard in hand. She paused, recognition flickering in her eyes. Elena had become a regular here over the past 4 years, a familiar face in the pediatric cardiology department. "Working Dad again?" the nurse asked, her tone sympathetic but with an edge of judgment. Elena forced a smile. "He is very dedicated to his job." The nurse nodded, the kind of nod that said she had seen this before. Seen fathers who prioritized everything over their sick children. She moved on without another word. Elena's phone buzzed, a text from Brad. "Client dinner tonight, do not wait up." She stared at the message, reading between the lines. Client dinner. How many client dinners had there been in the past year? How many nights had Brad come home smelling like unfamiliar perfume, his collar slightly askew, his explanation smooth and practiced? She had suspected for months, maybe longer. But suspecting was different from knowing. And part of her, the part that had given up everything for this marriage, was terrified of knowing. Elena turned off her phone and held Evan closer. Whatever was happening with Brad, she could not deal with it right now. Right now, her only focus was the small boy in her arms and whatever the cardiologist was about to tell them. Dr. Harrison was a kind man in his 60s, with gentle eyes and a habit of speaking directly to Evan rather than over his head. Elena had always appreciated that, but today, those gentle eyes were troubled. "His condition is progressing," the doctor said carefully. "The medication is helping, but his heart is working harder than we would like. We need to monitor him more closely." Elena's blood ran cold. What does that mean? More tests? For now, yes. But I want to be clear about something, Mrs. Crawford. If Evan experiences any respiratory distress, any difficulty breathing, you need to call 911 immediately. Do not try to drive him here yourself. Do not wait to see if it passes. Call immediately. Elena nodded, her throat tight. I understand. Dr. Harrison turned to Evan, his expression softening. You are a very brave young man, Evan. Your heart is working extra hard, and that makes you extra special. But you need to tell Mommy right away if you ever feel like you cannot breathe. Can you do that for me? Evan nodded solemnly. I will tell Mommy. Good boy. The doctor patted his head gently, then turned back to Elena. We will schedule more tests for next week. In the meantime, keep the monitor on him at all times, and do not hesitate to call if anything changes. Elena thanked him, gathered Evan's things, and walked out of the hospital into the gray December afternoon. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Brad. Meeting running late. Do not expect me before midnight. She deleted the message and did not respond. That evening, Elena went through the motions of their bedtime routine with extra care, extra tenderness, as if some primal part of her sensed that time was running out. She bathed Evan gently, careful of the wires. She dressed him in his favorite dinosaur pajamas. She brushed his teeth and helped him use the bathroom. She tucked him into his small bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and picture books. What story tonight, sweetheart? Evan considered the question with the seriousness of a philosopher contemplating the meaning of existence. The one about the brave knight. Elena smiled and pulled the worn storybook from his shelf. They had read this story 100 times, but Evan never tired of it. A story about a knight who faced impossible odds, who fought dragons and rescued princesses, and never gave up no matter how scared he was. She read the story slowly, savoring each word, watching Evan's eyes grow heavy with sleep. When she finished, his breathing had deepened, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically. Mommy? His voice was drowsy, barely a whisper. Yes, baby. Will I get better? The question pierced her heart like an arrow. She leaned down, pressing a kiss to his forehead, breathing him in. You are the bravest boy I know, she whispered, and brave boys always get better. He smiled, a small, sleepy smile, and his eyes drifted closed. Elena sat beside his bed for a long moment, watching him sleep, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the flutter of his eyelashes, the sound of his breathing. She did not know why, but she felt compelled to commit every detail to memory. I love you, Evan, she whispered. More than anything in the whole world, she kissed him one last time and quietly left the room. 3 hours later, Elena was folding laundry in the small living room when she found it. A receipt in the pocket of Brad's dress pants. St. Regis Hotel, Suite 1904, $1,200 per night, charged last Tuesday. Her hands began to shake. She should have felt shock. She should have felt rage. Instead, she felt a terrible, crushing sense of inevitability. Some part of her had known. Some part of her had always known. Elena stared at the receipt for a long time. Then, very carefully, she folded it and put it back in Brad's pocket. She was not ready to know. Not yet. Not while her son lay sleeping in the next room, fighting for his life. She could not deal with the destruction of her marriage while simultaneously dealing with the possible loss of her child. Tomorrow, she told herself, I will deal with it tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. Not the way she expected, because in less than 4 hours, Elena Crawford's entire world would shatter beyond recognition, and nothing would ever be the same again. The sound that woke Elena at 11:23 p.m. was unlike anything she had ever heard. A wet, desperate gasping, like someone trying to breathe through water. A sound that reached into her chest and squeezed her heart with an iron fist. Evan! She was out of bed before conscious thought caught up with instinct, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor as she ran down the hallway toward her son's room. What she found stopped her cold. Evan was sitting up in bed, his small hands clutching at his throat, his lips turning blue, his eyes wild with terror. The heart monitor was shrieking an alarm, red lights flashing in the darkness like a warning from hell itself. Baby! Elena rushed to him, gathering him into her arms, feeling the desperate heave of his chest against hers. He was trying to breathe, trying so hard, but something was wrong, terribly wrong. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand and dialed Brad with trembling fingers. The phone rang and went to voicemail. She dialed again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. She tried texting, her fingers barely able to form the words. Evan cannot breathe. Hospital. Please come. The red receipt appeared almost immediately. Seen at 11:31 p.m. No response. Elena did not have time to process the betrayal. She dialed 911, her voice surprisingly steady, as she gave the dispatcher their address and described Evan's symptoms. She was told to keep him calm, to keep him upright, that help was on the way. She held her son against her chest, rocking him gently, whispering the same words over and over. Stay with me, baby. Mommy is here. Help is coming. You are the bravest boy I know. Stay with me. Please stay with me. Evan's small hand found hers and squeezed weakly. His lips moved, forming a word she could barely hear. Daddy, he is coming, baby, Elena lied, tears streaming down her face. Daddy is coming. But Daddy was not coming. 12 blocks away in Suite 1904 of the St. Regis Hotel, Brad Crawford lay tangled in expensive sheets with a woman who was not his wife. Sloane Hartley was everything Elena was not. Young, ambitious, unburdened by a sick child or the exhaustion of caregiving. Her body was draped across Brad's chest, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing patterns on his skin. Brad's phone buzzed on the nightstand, then again, then again. Sloane reached for it lazily, glancing at the screen. She saw the name. She saw the word emergency. She is calling again, Sloane murmured, showing Brad the phone. And texting. Looks urgent. Brad barely opened his eyes. He had heard this before. Evan had these episodes. Elena always panicked. It always turned out fine. She is so dramatic, he said dismissively. He gets these episodes all the time. He always pulls through. She panics over everything. But it says emergency, Sloane pressed, a hint of something like concern in her voice. Maybe you should call her back. Brad reached over and silenced the phone, setting it face down on the nightstand. If it were really serious, she would call an ambulance. She knows I am busy. Sloane accepted this explanation with a small shrug. She had not met the child. She did not particularly want to. Children were complications, obstacles to be removed, especially sick children who consumed resources and attention that could be better directed elsewhere. She curled closer to Brad, running her hand down his chest. You are right, she purred. She is probably overreacting. Now where were we? Brad smiled and pulled her closer. And 12 blocks away, a little boy was dying. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. It felt like 7 hours. The paramedics moved with efficient urgency, loading Evan onto a small gurney, connecting him to oxygen, checking his vitals. Elena climbed in beside him, refusing to let go of his hand. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and fluorescent lights and the steady beeping of machines. Elena kept her eyes fixed on Evan's face, kept whispering to him, kept telling him to hold on. Help was coming. He was going to be okay. But his color was wrong. His breathing was wrong. Everything was wrong. They burst through the emergency room doors at 11:42 p.m. Doctors and nurses surrounded the gurney immediately, shouting orders Elena could not understand. Someone tried to pull her away, to guide her toward the waiting room, but she fought them. He is my son. Please, he is my son. A nurse, younger than Elena with kind eyes and gentle hands, finally managed to separate her from the gurney. We are going to do everything we can, the nurse said, but you need to let them work. Can you do that? Can you let them work? Elena nodded, unable to speak. She stood frozen in the hallway, watching through a window as doctors worked on her baby, as machines beeped and hands moved and someone started chest compressions. She tried Brad again. Voicemail. She left a message this time, her voice cracking with desperation. Brad, please. It is Evan. It is bad. Please come to the hospital. Please, she waited. She prayed. She bargained with God she was not sure she believed in anymore. Please, please. I will do anything. Just let him live. Please. At 11:47 p.m., the monitors went silent. A long, flat tone replaced the rhythmic beeping, a sound Elena would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. The doctor emerged from the room, his face gray with exhaustion and grief. He did not need to say the words. Elena already knew. Mrs. Crawford, I am so sorry. We did everything we could. Elena's legs gave out. She slid down the wall, her back scraping against the institutional paint, until she was sitting on the cold floor. A sound emerged from her throat that she did not recognize, a keening wail that echoed through the empty corridor. Her baby, her brave little boy, gone. The hospital chapel was empty at 2 a.m. Elena sat in the front pew, clutching Evan's dinosaur blanket to her chest, breathing in the fading scent of baby shampoo and little boy sweat. She had stopped crying. There were no tears left, only a vast, echoing emptiness where her heart used to be. Her phone buzzed, not a call, an email notification. The family iPad was synced to Brad's email account. He had set it up himself years ago, probably forgetting that it meant Elena could see everything that came through. She looked at the notification without really seeing it. Hotel confirmation, St. Regis, tonight. Then another email from someone named S. Tonight was amazing. Cannot wait for tomorrow. Miss you already. Elena stared at the words until they blurred. Then she laughed. It was not a sane laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had lost everything, who had just discovered the final betrayal on top of the ultimate loss. It was the laugh of someone crossing over from grief into something darker. Her son had died calling for his father, and his father had been in bed with another woman, ignoring the calls that could have saved their child. Elena stopped laughing. She stopped feeling anything at all. Something cold and patient settled into the empty space where her grief had been. Something that looked at the situation with clear, calculating eyes and began to plan. She put the blanket to her face one last time, breathing in Evan's scent. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in her bag, and stood. By the time Brad came home, she would be ready for him. Brad Crawford walked through the front door at 6 a.m., freshly showered and smelling of expensive hotel soap. He was already rehearsing his excuses, his mind running through the various lies he had prepared. He stopped cold when he saw Elena sitting in the dark living room. She sat in the armchair facing the door, perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Evan's blanket lay across her knees. On the coffee table in front of her were 2 printed emails. Babe, Brad started, his voice smooth with practiced concern. Listen, I am so sorry I could not make it last night. The meeting ran incredibly late, and by the time I saw your messages, I figured everything was under control. Elena said nothing. She simply looked at him. Brad shifted uncomfortably. He was not used to silence from Elena. Usually she cried, usually she pleaded, usually she begged him to change, to be better, to come home more often. Is everything okay? He asked, a note of genuine confusion creeping into his voice. Where is Evan? Elena finally spoke. Her voice was flat, emotionless, empty of everything that had once made her human. Evan died at 11:47 p.m. Brad's face went blank. For a moment, genuine shock replaced his carefully constructed mask. What? He stopped breathing. I called you 17 times. You saw my messages. The red receipts showed you saw them. Elena, I did not know. My phone was on silent. I was in meetings I did not see until later, and by then I thought everything was fine. You said he had these episodes. I thought he was okay. Elena picked up the first printed email and held it toward him. St. Regis Hotel, Suite 1904. Last night, $1,200 charged to our joint credit card. Brad's mask flickered. She watched guilt and calculation war for dominance in his eyes. Calculation 1. I can explain. The firm booked the room for a client meeting. We ran late and I stayed rather than drive home. It is not what you think. Elena held up the second email, the one from S. Tonight was amazing. Cannot wait for tomorrow. Dead silence stretched between them. Brad's face cycled through emotions, guilt, fear, anger, and finally the coldest of all, self-preservation. You are in shock, he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone she had learned to hate over the years. You do not know what you are saying. You just lost our son, and you are looking for someone to blame. I understand that. We can talk about this when you have calmed down. Elena stood. She was taller than him when she stood up straight, something she had forgotten over the years of making herself small. His last word was, Daddy, she said quietly. He was scared. He could not breathe. He called for you. and you were inside another woman. Brad took a step back. He had never seen this look in her eyes before. Cold, calculating, dangerous. Elena, listen to me. You are not thinking clearly. Grief does terrible things to people. Let me call someone, a therapist maybe. We can get through this together. Get out. This is my house, Brad blustered, his confidence returning now that he had decided on a strategy. I am not going anywhere. You are clearly having some kind of breakdown, and I think it is best if you get some rest. We can talk about all this tomorrow. Elena stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the ice in her eyes. I was a corporate litigator before I gave up everything for you. I know exactly how much you have to lose. I know the shell companies you think no one knows about. I know the offshore accounts. I know the partners at your firm who would love to know what their golden boy has been doing with client funds. So when I tell you to get out, I am not asking. I am telling. And you have exactly 5 minutes before I start making phone calls. Brad stared at her. For the first time in their marriage, he looked genuinely afraid. He grabbed his coat and left without another word. Elena watched him go. Then she sat back down, picked up Evan's blanket, and held it to her chest. She allowed herself one more hour of grief, one more hour to cry, to scream into the dinosaur fabric, to break apart completely. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, and reached in for her phone. She scrolled to a contact she had not called in 5 years. A contact Brad had convinced her to delete, to ignore, to forget. Dad. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Memories flooded back. Brad's voice, smooth and insidious. Your father is controlling, Elena. He never approved of us. If you want this marriage to work, you need to choose. She had chosen Brad, the biggest mistake of her life. But it was not too late to fix that mistake. She pressed call. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice she had almost forgotten answered immediately, as if he had been waiting by the phone for 5 years. Elena? Daddy, her voice broke on the word. Evan is gone, and I have no one. A long pause, then in a voice filled with quiet, controlled fury, I am on my way. Colonel Marcus Holden arrived at Elena's small apartment 18 hours after her phone call. He had driven through the night from his home in Virginia, stopping only for gas and coffee. Elena opened the door to find a man she barely recognized. 5 years had aged him. His hair was grayer, the lines on his face deeper, his posture slightly less ramrod straight, but his eyes were the same, clear, sharp, the eyes of a man who had spent 3 decades in military intelligence, learning how to read people in situations. He took one look at his daughter and pulled her into his arms. Elena collapsed against his chest, sobbing for the first time since leaving the hospital chapel. She had held herself together through Brad's confrontation, through the arrangements with the funeral home, through the endless paperwork and phone calls. But in her father's arms, she finally let herself fall apart. I pushed you away, she choked out between sobs. For years, I believed him when he said you were controlling, when he said I had to choose. I chose him, and now Evan is dead and I have nothing. Marcus held her tighter. I know what he said. I know what he did. I watched from a distance and it killed me. But none of that matters now. He pulled back, holding her face in his hands, the way he had when she was a little girl crying over a scraped knee. Tell me everything, he said, from the beginning. Leave nothing out, so she told him. The affairs she had suspected for months, the receipts she had found and chosen to ignore, the night Evan died, the 17 unanswered calls, the emails from Brad's cold denial and calculated counterattack. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold and calculating. Elena recognized that look. It was the look of a man mapping out a battlefield. What do you want to do? He asked finally. Elena met his eyes. Something had changed in her over the past 18 hours. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had transformed into something harder. Something more useful. I want to take everything from him, she said, her voice steady. Everything he cares about, his money, his reputation, his freedom. I want him to feel what I feel right now, like he has nothing left. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we do this properly, systematically, no rushed moves, no emotional outbursts. We plan, we gather evidence, we build our case, and when we are finished, there will not be anything left of Brad Crawford but ashes. He said this the way another father might discuss helping his daughter move apartments. Calm, practical, completely certain. Elena felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. How, she asked. Marcus pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. The same type of notebook he had carried throughout his military career, filled with meticulous notes and careful plans. First, we need allies. You mentioned you were a corporate litigator before you gave it up for him. Any contacts from that world who might still be useful? Elena thought for a moment. There was one name that kept rising to the surface. Rachel Bennett, she said. My best friend from law school. She is a divorce attorney now, one of the best in the city. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Best friend? I do not remember you mentioning her in years. Because I pushed her away, Elena admitted, the shame hot in her chest. Brad said she was jealous of our marriage. He said her negativity was toxic. So I cut her off. And do you think she would help you now? Elena remembered Rachel. The fierce loyalty, the stubborn refusal to give up on anyone she loved. The way she had kept sending birthday cards and Christmas messages even after Elena stopped responding. I think she would. Good. Call her. Marcus paused, considering. And what about evidence? You mentioned shell companies and offshore accounts. Do you have proof? I have suspicions. I have receipts and emails. But the serious financial stuff I only know about because Brad would talk on the phone sometimes when he thought I was not listening. Then we need access to his files, his emails, his financial records. Marcus smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. Lucky for you, I spent 30 years in military intelligence. I know people who can find things that are supposed to stay hidden. Is that legal? Marcus's smile did not waver. Define legal. Elena met Rachel Bennett at a small cafe 3 days later. The meeting was awkward at first, weighted with 5 years of silence and abandoned friendship. Rachel looked good, successful. Her hair was shorter than Elena remembered, her suit more expensive, her demeanor more polished. But when she saw Elena walk through the door, all that professional armor cracked. Her eyes filled with tears. Elena, she breathed. Oh my God, I heard about Evan. I am so sorry. They embraced and 5 years of distance melted away in an instant. They sat at a corner table, speaking in low voices over cups of coffee that grew cold and forgotten. I need your help, Elena said finally, but not just as a friend. I need the best divorce attorney in the city, and everyone says that is you. Rachel nodded slowly. I can help you with the divorce. But looking at your face, I think you want more than that. Elena pulled out a folder. In Tuanewe side were the printed emails, the hotel receipts, copies of financial documents her father's contacts had begun to uncover. Brad made me sign documents over the years. Financial things. I never read them because I trusted him. Now I am starting to think they were not what he said they were. Rachel flipped through the papers, her expression growing more serious with each page. These are not household documents, she said finally. These are corporate registrations, shell company structures. Elena, if what I am seeing here is accurate, your husband has been using you as a front for something much larger than infidelity. What do you mean? I mean, you need to find out exactly what you signed, because if these companies are being used for anything illegal, your signature on them makes you legally responsible. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. So he did not just cheat on me. He set me up? It looks that way. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. But here is the good news. If we can prove forgery, if we can show that you signed these documents under false pretenses, then we can turn this whole thing around. He becomes the criminal, not you. How do we prove that? We start by documenting everything. Every signature you gave, every document you remember signing. We compare them to the actual registrations, and we get a forensic handwriting expert involved if necessary. Elena nodded. I can do that. My father is already working on getting access to Brad's financial records. Your father? Rachel looked surprised. I thought you two were estranged. We were. Elena's jaw tightened. But when your grandson dies because your son-in-law was too busy with his mistress to answer the phone, old grudges tend to seem less important. Rachel was silent for a moment. Then she reached across and took Elena's hand again. I told you 5 years ago that Brad was wrong for you, she said softly. You said I was jealous. I was not. I was scared for you. I know I am sorry. You do not need to apologize. You need to fight, and I am going to help you. Rachel's expression hardened with determination. We do this together, whatever you need. I am here. For the first time since Evan's death, Elena felt something other than grief and rage. She felt the warmth of friendship, the power of women supporting women. Thank you, she whispered. Rachel smiled. Do not thank me yet. Thank me when that bastard is behind bars. The evidence-gathering phase took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, of poring over documents, of meeting with investigators and experts that Marcus's contacts provided. Elena transformed during those weeks. She stopped crying, she started eating again, sleeping again, and functioning again. But she was not the same woman she had been before. Something fundamental had shifted. The grief had not disappeared, but it had hardened into something useful, something like armor. She went through her memories of the past 4 years with ruthless precision, cataloging every document Brad had asked her to sign, every late-night request she had been too exhausted to question. She remembered signing things for the house, for Evan's medical trust, for insurance policies. She remembered being half asleep, trusting Brad completely, scrawling her name without reading the fine print. He had exploited that trust systematically. Meanwhile, Marcus worked his own channels. His contacts in the intelligence community had retired, but their skills had not. Within 2 weeks, he had obtained copies of Brad's financial records going back 5 years. What they revealed was staggering. Shell companies registered in Delaware, offshore accounts in the Caymans, wire transfers totaling millions of dollars moving through accounts that bore Elena's signature, but clearly had nothing to do with her. He has been laundering money, Marcus said during one of their strategy sessions. The question is, for whom? And more importantly, does he actually control any of it, or is he just a puppet? Elena studied the transaction records, her legal training kicking in despite the years of disuse. Some of these transfers do not make sense, she said slowly. Look here. Money coming in from accounts Brad could not possibly have access to, and going out to accounts with names I do not recognize. If he was the one running this operation, he would be more careful about covering his tracks. So someone else is pulling the strings? Maybe. Elena frowned. We need to find out who. That investigation would come later. For now, they had enough. 3 weeks after Evan's funeral, Elena sat in Rachel's office with a folder full of evidence, affair documentation, financial fraud records, and most damning of all, security footage Rachel's investigator had obtained from Brad's office building. The footage showed Brad on his phone the night Evan died. Elena watched as Brad looked at the screen, saw her name, and silenced the call. She watched him smile at something, probably Sloan, and slipped the phone into his pocket without a second thought. He knew I was calling, Elena said, her voice steady despite the pain. He saw it was an emergency, and he chose to ignore it. Rachel nodded grimly. This is powerful. Combined with the affair evidence and the financial fraud, we have enough to destroy him completely. Are you ready to file? Elena looked at the folder. All those documents, all that evidence, all that pain distilled into paper and photographs. She thought about Evan, about his last word, Daddy, about the hope in his voice when he asked if his father would come to his appointment, about the confusion in his eyes every time Brad walked out the door without saying goodbye. File it, she said. Rachel picked up the phone. But before she could dial, Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming text, an unknown number. She opened it and felt her blood turn to ice. You really should not have started this fight, the message read. You have no idea who you are dealing with. Elena showed the message to Rachel, who frowned. Brad? No, Elena shook her head slowly. This is not his style. He would call and try to manipulate me. This is someone else. Someone who knows we have been investigating. Could his partners at the firm have tipped him off? Maybe, or maybe there is someone else involved. Someone we have not identified yet. Rachel set down the phone. Do you want to wait? Do more research? Elena thought about it for a long moment. Then she shook her head. No, we file tomorrow. Whatever this is, whoever sent this, running scared is not going to help us. We go forward, we keep pressing, and we find out who is really behind all of this. Rachel smiled, a fierce, admiring smile. That is the Elena I remember, she said. Welcome back. Elena filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, her entire world had collapsed again. It started with a knock at her door. Two men in dark suits, faces impassive, badges held at chest height. "Mrs. Crawford, I am Agent Morrison with the FBI. This is Agent Peters. We would like to ask you some questions about Meridian Holdings, LLC. Elena felt her stomach drop. She knew that name. It was one of the shell companies on the documents she had signed without reading. "What about it? You are listed as the primary shareholder." Agent Morrison's voice was flat, accusatory. "We have some concerns about the financial activity in those accounts. I do not know anything about Meridian Holdings. My husband made me sign documents. I did not know what they were." "That is what everyone says, Mrs. Crawford." Agent Peters spoke for the first time, his tone dripping with skepticism. "May we come in?" Elena wanted to refuse. She wanted to call Rachel, call her father, call anyone who could help. But she knew that refusing would only make things worse. "Of course," she said, stepping aside. "Come in." The interview lasted 3 hours. By the end of it, Elena felt like she had been turned inside out. The agents had evidence. Damning evidence. Bank records showing millions of dollars flowing through accounts with her name on them. Wire transfers to and from companies that reeked of money laundering. Corporate documents bearing her signature, each one another nail in a coffin she had not known was being built. When they finally left, Elena sat in her empty apartment, staring at the wall. Brad had not just cheated on her. He had not just abandoned their dying son. He had spent years systematically setting her up to take the fall for his crimes. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Different from before. "I warned you." Then another message. This one with an attachment. A document. Elena opened it with trembling fingers. It was a restraining order, filed by Brad Crawford against his wife Elena, claiming she had threatened him, claiming she was mentally unstable, claiming she posed a danger to herself and others. The grounds for the order cited statements from witnesses, names she recognized, people from Brad's social circle, people she had thought were friends, now lined up to testify that she was crazy, dangerous, unfit. Her phone rang. "Rachel, Elena, we have a problem." "I know. The FBI was just here and Brad filed a restraining order." "It gets worse." Rachel's voice was strained. "Brad filed for divorce this morning. He filed first, and his claims are devastating." "What claims?" "He is saying you neglected Evan, that you were the reason his health declined, that you were mentally unstable throughout the marriage, and he was the one holding the family together. He has witnesses lined up to testify." "That is insane. I gave up my career to care for our son. I was with him every day, every appointment, every hospital visit. Brad was never there, I know. And we will fight it." But Elena, the narrative is already out there. Brad's mother has been spreading rumors through her social network. People are already choosing sides, and they are not choosing yours. Elena closed her eyes. "So he is painting me as the villain." "Exactly. The unstable wife who drove him to an affair. The neglectful mother who let her son die. The criminal mastermind behind the money laundering scheme. He is trying to destroy you before you can destroy him. How do we fight this? We prove the truth, the forged signatures, the affair evidence, the security footage. We build our case and we take it public before he can control the narrative." "In the FBI investigation?" Rachel hesitated. "That is going to be harder. If they seriously believe you were involved in the money laundering, you could face criminal charges. We need to prove that you signed those documents under false pretenses, that you had no knowledge of their true purpose." "How long will that take?" "I do not know. Weeks, maybe months." Elena stared at the ceiling of her small apartment. Less than a month ago, she had been a mother with a sick son and a troubled marriage. Now she was a widow, a defendant in a federal investigation, and the target of a coordinated campaign to destroy her reputation and her freedom. "My father," she said finally. "Have you talked to him?" "He called me an hour ago. He is already working on something. He said to tell you not to give up." "What is he working on?" "I do not know. He would not say." "But Elena, I have known your father for years. That man does not give up, and he does not lose. Whatever he is planning, it is going to hurt someone." "I hope so," Elena said quietly. "I really, really hope so." The next 2 weeks were the worst of Elena's life. She was served with the restraining order, which meant she could not approach Brad or the house they had shared. She was called in for 2 more FBI interviews, each one more aggressive than the last. And everywhere she went, she felt the weight of public judgment. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. At the grocery store, a woman she used to know approached her with venom in her eyes. "I heard what you did to Brad," the woman said loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "He was such a good father, such a dedicated husband, and you try to blame him for your son's death? You should be ashamed of yourself." Elena said nothing. She left her cart where it stood and walked out of the store, head held high, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her cry. But inside her apartment, with the door locked and the curtains drawn, she broke. She sat on the floor of her bathroom, clutching Evan's dinosaur blanket, and sobbed until she had no tears left. Then she sat in silence, staring at the tiles, wondering if this was how her life ended. Not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a slow suffocation of despair. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. "I am coming over. We need to talk." 30 minutes later, Marcus Holden walked into her apartment and found his daughter hollow-eyed and defeated. He did not offer empty comfort. He did not tell her everything would be okay. He simply sat down across from her and looked at her with those clear, sharp eyes. "You are making the same mistake every defeated soldier makes," he said. "You think the battle is over because you lost the first engagement." Elena shook her head. "He has everything, Dad. Money, lawyers, connections. The FBI is investigating me, not him. People think I am the villain. I have nothing left." "And what do you have?" "Nothing," Marcus leaned forward. "You have me, you have the truth, and you have something Brad does not have. Patience." "Patience? I did not spend 30 years in military intelligence to let some Wall Street narcissist destroy my daughter. We are not going to fight his war, Elena. We are going to fight ours, and our war is fought differently." "How?" Marcus smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "By making sure everyone who helped him suffers right alongside him. By the time we are finished, Brad Crawford will not have a single ally left, and then he will understand what it really means to have nothing." The private dining room at the Manhattan Metropolitan Club was decorated in the restrained opulence of old money. Mahogany panels, crystal chandeliers, portraits of long-dead industrialists staring down from the walls with imperious disapproval. Colonel Marcus Holden sat at a table set for 4, nursing a glass of bourbon he had not touched. Across from him sat 3 men in suits that probably cost more than a used car. The senior partners of Crawford Hamilton Pierce, the investment firm where Brad Crawford had built his career. "Gentlemen," Marcus said pleasantly, "I appreciate you meeting with me on such short notice. I know you are busy men." The eldest of the 3, a silver-haired man named Richard Hamilton, nodded cautiously. "Your reputation precedes you, Colonel Holden. When a man with your background requests a meeting, one pays attention. What can we do for you?" "It is more what I can do for you." Marcus slid a thick folder across the polished table. "I have become aware of some irregularities in your firm's accounts, specifically transactions tied to an associate named Brad Crawford." The 3 partners exchanged glances. Marcus noted the micro-expressions: concern, calculation, a hint of fear. "What kind of irregularities?" The youngest partner, David Pierce, asked carefully. Marcus opened the folder and turned it so they could see the contents. "Client funds being redirected to offshore accounts. Shell companies used to mask the movement of money. Wire transfers to entities that, upon investigation, appear to have ties to organized crime. All of it linked, directly or indirectly, to accounts managed by Mr. Crawford." Silence, heavy and suffocating. "Now," Marcus continued, "I am not suggesting you knew about any of this. I am sure you are as shocked as I was to learn that one of your senior associates has been using your firm's reputation as cover for what appears to be a money laundering operation. If this is true," Hamilton said slowly, "why are you bringing it to us? Why not the authorities?" "Because I believe in giving people the opportunity to do the right thing. And because the authorities, when they become involved, tend to be somewhat indiscriminate in their investigations. They might not stop at Mr. Crawford. They might wonder what the senior partners knew, when they knew it, what they might have overlooked." The implication landed like a bomb. Pierce's face went pale. The 3rd partner, a quiet man named Thomas who had not spoken yet, gripped the arm of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. "What exactly do you want?" Hamilton asked, his voice cold. Marcus smiled. "What I want is very simple. I want Brad Crawford removed from your firm. Immediately. Publicly. I want it made clear that the firm does not tolerate the behavior outlined in this folder. And if we refuse, then this folder finds its way to the SEC and the FBI, and several journalists I happen to know who specialize in financial crime. The story that emerges will not be kind to anyone, but I imagine the partners of a prestigious firm would have the most to lose." Hamilton stared at him for a long moment. Then he picked up the folder and began to read. Marcus led him. He sipped his bourbon and watched the color drain from each partner's face as they reviewed the evidence. Finally, Hamilton set down the folder and looked at his colleagues. A silent conversation passed between them. "We will need to verify this information," Hamilton said carefully. "Of course." Marcus stood, buttoning his jacket. "I would expect nothing less. But I would suggest you verify quickly. This information has a tendency to find its way into unwelcome hands when left unaddressed." He walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and gentlemen, my grandson died while Mr. Crawford was too busy with his mistress to answer his phone. So when I say I want him removed from your firm, understand that I am being remarkably restrained." He left without waiting for a response. 48 hours later, Brad Crawford arrived at his office to find security guards waiting at the elevator. "Mr. Crawford," the head of security said, his tone professionally neutral, "I need you to come with me. What is this about? There are some concerns about your accounts. The partners would like to speak with you." Brad followed the guards to the main conference room, his confident stride faltering slightly as he noticed the whispers, the averted gazes, the way his colleagues suddenly found their desks fascinating. Inside the conference room, all three senior partners sat at the table. Their expressions were stone. "Brad," Hamilton said flatly, "have a seat. What is going on? You are being placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into irregularities in your accounts." Brad's face went red. "This is insane. Whatever you think you have found, there is an explanation. I am sure there is. But until that explanation is provided to our satisfaction, you will not have access to this building, your accounts, or any company resources. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. You cannot do this. We already have." Pierce slid a document across the table. "Your letter of suspension. Effective immediately. If you wish to contest it, you may consult with an attorney, but I would advise against making a scene. The press tends to notice when security escorts someone from the building." Brad stared at the document, then at the partners, then at the security guards waiting by the door. For the first time, real fear flickered across his face. "This is not over," he said, grabbing the document. "You are making a mistake, perhaps," Hamilton said calmly, "but it is our mistake to make. Good day, Mr. Crawford." Elena learned about Brad's dismissal from a text message from Rachel. "It is done. He is out. Your father works fast." She called her father immediately. "How did you do it?" "I simply provided information to people who needed it. They made their own decisions." "What happens now?" "Now we wait. Brad will scramble. He will reach out to his contacts, his allies, anyone who might help him. And we watch to see who answers. That will tell us who else needs to be dealt with." "And the FBI investigation into me?" "Your lawyer is handling that. But Elena, the forensic handwriting expert Rachel hired has preliminary findings. The signatures on those documents are forgeries. Good ones, but forgeries. So we can prove I did not sign them? We can prove the signatures are not yours. What we cannot prove yet is who did sign them. But we are working on that." Elena exhaled slowly. It felt like the first real breath she had taken in weeks. "Thank you, Dad. Do not thank me yet. We are only getting started." The next piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Rachel called Elena 3 days after Brad's dismissal, her voice vibrating with barely contained excitement. "I have been digging into Sloane Hartley," she said, "and I found something." "What?" "She is not just Brad's mistress, she is the architect of everything." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she targeted Brad specifically. 3 years ago, before the affair even started, she researched him. She knew about your family. She knew about your father's wealth and connections. Why would she do that? Because she has done it before. Different names, different cities, different victims. I found court records, news articles, Lawsuits that went nowhere. Elena, Sloan Hartley is not even her real name. She was born Susan Mitchell. She has a conviction for fraud in Ohio from 10 years ago. She changed her identity and started over. Elena felt the pieces clicking into place. So Brad is not the mastermind. Brad is a puppet, a useful idiot. Sloan has been playing him from the beginning, and probably laughing the whole time. But why target us specifically? We were not wealthy. Brad makes good money, but not fortune-level money. Your father, Rachel's voice was grim. She targeted Brad because of his connection to you, and you because of your connection to Colonel Marcus Holden and Holden Security Group. Your father's company has contracts with government agencies. It has access to information and resources that someone like Sloan would find very valuable. Elena sat down heavily. She had thought Brad was the enemy. She had been wrong. Brad was just the weapon. The real enemy was someone she had never suspected. Does my father know? He is finding out right now. And Elena, he is not happy. I imagine not. There is something else. That money flowing through the shell companies in your name, some of it has been disappearing into a third set of accounts. Accounts that trace back to Sloan directly. She has been skimming from her own operation. Brad probably has no idea. So she was planning to take the money and disappear. Leave Brad and me holding the bag. That is what it looks like. Elena closed her eyes. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. She had lost her son, her marriage, her reputation, her freedom, and all of it had been orchestrated by a woman she had never even met. What do we do now? Now, Rachel said, we make them destroy each other, and then we pick up the pieces. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Sloan had been playing Brad for years, manipulating him like a puppet while he believed he was the one in control. All Elena and her allies had to do was make Brad realize the truth. His ego and his self-preservation instincts would do the rest. It started with anonymous tips, carefully crafted pieces of information delivered to Brad through channels he trusted. A concerned friend who had heard rumors, a colleague who noticed something strange in the accounts, a private investigator's report that somehow found its way to his desk. Each piece of information pointed to the same conclusion. Sloan was not his partner. She was his handler, and she was preparing to throw him to the wolves while walking away with everything. Brad, being Brad, reacted exactly as expected. The confrontation happened in Sloan's apartment. Brad arrived with the evidence he had gathered, his face twisted with fury. You have been stealing from me, he snarled. This whole time, you have been siphoning money into your own accounts. You have been setting me up. Sloan remained calm. She had prepared for this possibility. Brad, darling, you are being paranoid. Whatever you think you have found, I can explain. Explain this. He threw a stack of documents at her. Account statements, wire transfers, a paper trail leading directly to accounts in her name. Accounts you said did not exist. Sloan picked up the documents and scanned them quickly. Her expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation. She was reassessing the situation, determining her next move. Where did you get these? She asked quietly. Does it matter? You have been playing me for years. Everything I did, everything I risked. It was all so you could take the money and disappear. Was any of it real? Or was I just a tool? Sloan set down the documents and looked at him with something like pity. Oh, Brad, you really have no idea, do you? Everything I did was for us, for our future. The plan was always to take the money and start over somewhere without extradition treaties. Together. Together? Brad laughed bitterly. You have been preparing to frame my wife for everything. You have been building a case against me so you could walk away clean. I have been building a case against her. There is a difference. Your wife is the one whose name is on all those documents. Your wife is the one the FBI is investigating. When this is over, she takes the fall, and we walk away. And the accounts in your name? Insurance, in case things went wrong. Sloan stepped closer, her voice softening. But things do not have to go wrong. We can still make this work. We can still have everything we planned. Brad stared at her. For a moment, Elena's allies watching from outside wondered if he would fall for it. If his desire for Sloan would override his self-preservation instincts. It did not. I trusted you. he said flatly. I gave up my son for you. I destroyed my marriage for you. And you were going to leave me with nothing. Brad, please. No, he backed toward the door. I am done. Whatever you think is going to happen, I am not going down with you. He left. Sloane watched him go, her expression finally cracking to reveal the cold fury beneath. Brad went straight to the FBI. He told them everything about the shell companies, about the offshore accounts, about Sloane Hartley and her real identity as Susan Mitchell. He painted himself as a victim, a man who had been manipulated and deceived, who had no idea his mistress was a career criminal. The agents listened. They took notes. And then they made some calls. 24 hours later, FBI agents arrived at Sloane Hartley's apartment with an arrest warrant. She was not there, but they tracked her to Brad's firm, where she had gone to retrieve documents she thought she might need. They arrested her in the lobby in front of dozens of witnesses, cameras flashing, voices shouting. The images were everywhere within hours. The beautiful young executive, handcuffed and pale, being led to a waiting car. The headlines screamed scandal. The rumor mill went into overdrive. Elena watched the coverage from her small apartment, Rachel beside her. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel something like hope. It is over, she said. Is it not? She is arrested. Brad confessed. The investigation will shift to them. Rachel nodded slowly. It looks that way. The FBI seems satisfied that you were a victim in all this. The forensic evidence supports that. The forged signatures. The timeline. So I am in the clear? You are in the clear. Elena exhaled. The tension she had been carrying for weeks began to release, muscle by muscle, breath by breath. She looked at Evan's photograph on the table beside her. His smiling face, his bright eyes. I got them, baby, she whispered. It is finally over. It was not over. 2 days later, Elena's phone rang. Rachel's voice was strained. The charges against Sloane had been dropped. What? The evidence files were corrupted. Everything Brad provided to the FBI, gone. Destroyed. Someone with access to the federal system deleted them. That is impossible. How? I do not know. But Sloane is free. And Elena, there is more. What more could there possibly be? She knows it was us. She knows you were behind Brad turning on her. And she is not the type to let that go. Elena sat down heavily. The brief moment of hope evaporated, replaced by familiar dread. So she is coming for me. She is coming for all of us. Whatever connections she has, whatever resources, she is going to use them. What do? We keep fighting. What else can we do? The first blow came within hours. Elena arrived at her father's house for their regular strategy session and found paramedics loading him into an ambulance. His face was gray, his breathing labored, his hand clutching his chest. Dad! She ran to his side. What happened? Heart attack, one of the paramedics said. We need to get him to the hospital now. Are you family? I am his daughter. Elena climbed into the ambulance, gripping her father's hand. Dad, stay with me, please. Marcus opened his eyes. His grip on her hand was weak but determined. Do not stop, he rasped. Whatever happens, you finish this. Dad, please, promise me. I promise. His eyes closed. The paramedics went to work, and Elena sat in the ambulance, watching her father fight for his life, wondering how much more she could possibly lose. Marcus survived. The surgery was successful, the doctors cautiously optimistic about his recovery, but he would be in the hospital for weeks, maybe longer. He would not be able to help her. Elena was alone, except she was not quite. Her phone rang. Rachel. Elena braced herself for more bad news. Instead, Rachel's voice was steady and calm. I have to withdraw from your case. What? No, Rachel, you are the only lawyer I have. Sloane has something on me. From my past. Something I thought was buried. If I do not step back, she will destroy my career. My family. Everything. Rachel, please. You said you would help me. You said we would do this together. A long silence. Then Rachel's voice thick with tears. I am so sorry, Elena. I wish I was strong enough to fight her. But I am not. I have children. I have a husband. I cannot risk everything for this. I understand. Elena did not understand, but she said it anyway. Thank you for trying. I hope you win, Rachel whispered. I really do. The line went dead. Elena sat in the hospital waiting room, surrounded by strangers, her father in recovery, her best friend gone, her enemy free and hunting. She had never felt more alone in her life. The hospital waiting room was painted in shades of institutional gray. Elena sat in a plastic chair that seemed designed for maximum discomfort, staring at the wall without seeing it. Her father was stable. That was the good news. The bad news was everything else. Sloan was free. Brad was cooperating with authorities, spinning a story that painted himself as a victim. Rachel had withdrawn. The evidence they had gathered was either corrupted or inadmissible. Every legal avenue they had pursued was now closed, and Sloan was not finished. The text messages had started that morning. Unknown numbers, each one with a new taunt. Did you really think you could win? Your father is weak. Your friends are gone. What do you have left? I am going to destroy everything you care about, and you are going to watch. Elena deleted each message without responding. She knew that was what Sloan wanted. A reaction, fear, desperation, proof that she was winning. Elena would not give her the satisfaction. But in the quiet hours of the night, alone in the hospital waiting room, Elena could not stop the thoughts from coming. What was the point? She had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, and for what? Evan was still dead. Brad was still free. Sloan was still winning. Every step forward led to 2 steps back. Maybe it was time to accept defeat. Maybe it was time to let go. She pulled out her phone and looked at Evan's photograph. His smiling face, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the dinosaur pajamas he loved so much. I failed you, she whispered. I tried so hard, and I failed. The grief hit her like a wave, sudden and overwhelming. She doubled over in her chair, sobbing silently, her body shaking with the force of emotions she had been holding back for weeks. When she finally looked up, a nurse was standing beside her. Mrs. Crawford, your father is awake. He is asking for you. Marcus looked smaller in the hospital bed, thinner, older. But when Elena entered the room, his eyes were sharp and clear. You look terrible, he said. Elena laughed despite herself. You are one to talk. Fair point. He gestured weakly toward the chair beside his bed. Sit. Talk. What has happened while I was being dramatic? Elena sat. She told him everything. The dropped charges, Rachel's withdrawal, Sloan's threats, the hopelessness she felt. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. So you are ready to give up, he said finally. I do not know what else to do. Yes, you do. Elena looked at him. You are my daughter, Marcus said. You are not weak. You are not helpless. And you are not going to let some con artist win. She has destroyed everything, Dad. Everything we built. She has destroyed our first approach. That is not the same thing. He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. When I was in the field, we called this getting burned. Your cover is blown. Your contacts are compromised. Your resources are gone. It feels like the end. Is it not? No, it is the beginning of a different approach. The first approach was surgical, precise. We tried to take them down through legal channels and institutional pressure. That failed, so now we try something else. What else is there? Marcus smiled, a cold, dangerous smile that reminded Elena of the man he had been 30 years ago. Sloan has done this before, he said, to other families, other victims. Find them, walk by, because people like Sloan make enemies, and enemies keep records. Find the people she has destroyed. Find out what they know. Find the evidence she thought was buried. How? I do not even know where to start. You start by researching court records, news articles, pattern analysis. Sloan has been doing this for years. She has left trails. You just have to find them. And if I do find something, if I find other victims, what then? Then you do what she never expected, Marcus said. You give them hope. You give them a chance to fight back. You build an army. Elena stared at her father. An army. Sloan has always preyed on isolated victims, people with no resources, no connections, no one to help them. She picks them off one by one because she knows they cannot fight back alone. But together, Marcus finished, you might just have enough to bring her down. Elena sat back in her chair thinking. It was risky. It was uncertain. There was no guarantee she would find anyone or that they would help if she did. But it was something, a direction, a purpose. I will try, she said. No, Marcus shook his head. You will succeed because giving up is not an option. Not for you, not for Evan. Elena nodded slowly. Then she leaned forward and kissed her father's forehead. Get some rest, she said. I have work to do. Elena spent the next 3 days doing nothing but research. She combed through court records and news archives. She searched for patterns in fraud cases, identity theft, marriages that ended in mysterious financial ruin. She looked for victims who matched the profile of what Sloan had done to her family. And slowly she began to find them. A family in Cleveland who lost everything in 2016. The wife had been blamed for embezzlement from her own husband's company. She had died by suicide a year later. A couple in Atlanta in 2019. The husband disappeared with all their money, leaving the wife facing criminal charges for fraud she had never committed. A family in Phoenix in 2021. Same pattern, same trajectory, same devastation. And in each case, buried in the court documents and police reports, Elena found traces of the same woman. Different names, different appearances, but the same methods, the same signature. Susan Mitchell, Sandra Martin, Sarah Monroe, Sloan Hartley, 4 identities, 4 destroyed families, 1 monster. Elena compiled everything she found into a folder. Names, dates, locations, evidence. Then she started making phone calls. Most of the victims were dead or unreachable, but one name kept appearing in multiple cases, listed as a witness, a friend, a family member who had tried to help. Margaret Patterson. Elena found her living in a small town in Pennsylvania, far from the life she had once known. She called the number 3 times before Margaret answered. Who is this? Margaret's voice was suspicious, guarded. My name is Elena Crawford. I think we have someone in common. A woman named Sloan Hartley, though you might have known her by a different name. Silence on the other end, then quietly. Susan Mitchell. That is what she called herself when she destroyed my life. I know. Elena gripped the phone tightly. She is doing the same thing to me now, and I need your help. Another long silence. I kept everything, Margaret said finally. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence. I knew one day someone would come looking. I am coming to you, Elena said. Tell me where. Margaret gave her the address. And for the first time in days, Elena felt something other than despair. She felt hope. Margaret Patterson lived in a small house on a quiet street in a town that had clearly seen better days. The paint was peeling, the lawn overgrown, the windows covered with heavy curtains that blocked the light. Elena knocked and waited. After a long moment, the door opened. Margaret was 52 years old, but she looked older. Her hair was gray, her face lined, her eyes hollow with the weight of years of pain. You are Elena, she said. It was not a question. I am. Come in. The inside of the house was cramped and cluttered. Every surface covered with boxes and folders and stacks of papers. It looked less like a home than an archive. I have been waiting for years, Margaret said, leading Elena to a small living room, waiting for someone to come, someone who could use what I have. What do you have? Margaret gestured at the boxes surrounding them. Everything, every document Susan ever touched, every email she sent, every transaction she made. I tracked her for 3 years after she destroyed my family. I compiled everything, organized it, made it ready. Ready for what? Ready for this. Margaret picked up a folder and handed it to Elena. For someone who could actually fight back. Elena opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, corporate documents, photographs, and transcripts. Evidence of fraud spanning years in multiple states. Why did you never take this to the police? I tried. Margaret's voice was bitter. They did not believe me. Or they were paid not to believe me. Susan has connections, people in places you would not expect. Every time I got close to exposing her, she made the evidence disappear. Made me look crazy. Made everyone doubt my story. So you gave up? I survived. Margaret's eyes met hers. There is a difference. I could not fight anymore. I had nothing left. But I kept everything, hoping that one day someone would come who had more strength, more resources, more reason to fight. Elena thought of her father, of Rachel, of Evan. I have reason, she said. Then take it. Margaret pushed the folder into her hands. All of it. Use it and make that woman pay for what she has done. Elena spent the next 2 days going through Margaret's files. The scope of Sloane's crimes was staggering. She had destroyed at least 4 families that Elena could document, probably more. She had stolen millions of dollars across multiple identities. She had left a trail of broken lives and ruined reputations that stretched back over a decade. And she had gotten away with it every single time. But this time was different. This time, Elena had something Sloane had never faced before. She had a father with government connections. She had a lawyer who knew how to fight. And she had a network of victims who had been waiting for this moment. Elena started making phone calls. First, she called Rachel. I know you said you had to withdraw, Elena began. I did. I do. Rachel's voice was heavy. Elena, you do not understand what Sloane has on me. I do understand. Elena's voice was calm. And I am not asking you to do anything illegal. I am asking you to help me one more time. Behind the scenes, no official involvement, no paper trail. What are you planning? I am planning to destroy Sloane Hartley the same way she destroyed Margaret Patterson and all the others, by exposing the truth, by building a case so airtight that no amount of corruption can make it disappear. Silence on the other end. I found Margaret, Elena continued. She has everything, years of documentation, evidence that ties Sloane to fraud cases in 6 states, real names, real accounts, real trails. How do you know the evidence is not corrupted too? Because it is not digital. Margaret kept paper copies, physical documents, photographs, things that cannot be deleted remotely. More silence. Then, what do you need from me? I need you to help me organize it. Quietly. I need you to identify which pieces of evidence are strongest, which jurisdictions would be most likely to prosecute, which agencies would be most receptive. You are building a federal case. I am building several. Elena's voice hardened. Sloane destroyed evidence at the FBI once. She will not be able to do it again if we file simultaneously in multiple jurisdictions. Rachel exhaled slowly. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Is it? Another pause. Then Rachel laughed, a sound of reluctant admiration. Fine, send me what you have. I will look at it. But Elena, if this goes wrong, if Sloane finds out what we are doing before we are ready to move, it will not just be bad. It will be catastrophic. I know. Elena smiled grimly. That is why we are not going to fail. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Elena worked 18-hour days, organizing evidence, making calls, coordinating with contacts her father had provided. Marcus, recovering slowly but steadily, directed operations from his hospital bed via encrypted phone calls. Rachel worked behind the scenes, identifying the strongest cases in the best jurisdictions. She connected Elena with prosecutors in Ohio, Georgia, and Arizona who had been frustrated by unsolved fraud cases for years. Margaret provided constant support, filling in gaps, providing context, sharing details that only a first-hand witness could know. And slowly, piece by piece, the case against Sloane Hartley came together. When Elena was finally ready, she called a meeting at her small apartment. Her father, recently released from the hospital, sat in the best chair, still weak but determined. Rachel stood by the window, nervous but committed. Margaret had traveled from Pennsylvania to be there in person. 4 people against an empire of lies, Elena thought. But it was enough. It had to be enough. We are ready, Elena said. Tomorrow, we file simultaneously in 4 jurisdictions: Ohio, Georgia, Arizona, and New York. Each case is independent, each supported by evidence that cannot be digitally corrupted. Sloane cannot destroy them all. What about Brad? Rachel asked. Brad is already cooperating with federal authorities. He is testifying against Sloane to save himself. His testimony, combined with our evidence, creates a web she cannot escape. And her FBI contacts? Marcus smiled coldly. I have spoken with some old friends at the agency. The people who corrupted the evidence are being investigated. By the time Sloane realizes what is happening, her protection will be gone. Elena looked around the room at the faces of her allies, her father, her friend, a woman she had never met before this crisis. 1 year ago, she had been a mother with a sick son and a troubled marriage. 6 months ago, she had lost everything she thought mattered, but she had found something else instead. Strength she did not know she had, allies she did not know existed, and a purpose that gave meaning to her grief. Tomorrow we take everything from her, Elena said, the way she took everything from us. Are we ready? The nods around the room were unanimous. They were ready. Elena chose the restaurant carefully. Upscale, quiet, the kind of place where people discuss things they did not want overheard. Sloane arrived exactly on time, dressed impeccably as always, her confidence radiating like a force field. She slid into the booth across from Elena with the grace of a predator who believed she had already won. I was surprised you wanted to meet, Sloane said, her smile thin and sharp. I assumed you would be busy with funeral arrangements. Your father's health, I hear, has been quite precarious. Elena did not react to the taunt. He is recovering, thank you. Pity, Sloane picked up the menu, glancing at it casually. So, you said you wanted to discuss terms. I assume that means you are ready to surrender. Actually, Elena said, I am here to offer you a choice. Sloane laughed. A choice? You have nothing left. No lawyer, no evidence. Your father is an old man on borrowed time. Your friends have abandoned you. What possible choice could you offer me? Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She placed it on the table between them. Susan Mitchell, Elena said quietly. Cleveland, 2016. The Patterson family. Sloane's smile flickered. Sandra Martin, Atlanta, 2019. The Williams family. The smile vanished. Sarah Monroe, Phoenix, 2021. The Henderson family. Elena leaned forward, her voice like ice. I have everything. Every identity, every victim, every trail of destruction you thought you buried. Sloane's composure cracked. For the first time, Elena saw something like fear in her eyes. I found Margaret, Elena continued. Remember her? The one who kept records. The one you thought was too broken to fight back. Whatever she has, Sloane said quickly, it is meaningless. Old documents, circumstantial evidence, nothing that would hold up in court. Actually, you are wrong, Elena smiled. Margaret kept physical copies, paper, photographs, bank statements, things that can not be deleted remotely, things that trace back to you through every identity you have ever used. That proves nothing. It proves everything. The FBI has copies, not the agents you paid off, different agents, agents who have been investigating you for months without your knowledge. Sloane's face went pale. You are bluffing. Am I? Elena pulled out her phone and showed Sloane a series of news alerts. A breaking story about charges being filed in Ohio, another in Georgia, a third in Arizona. Right now, Elena said, prosecutors in 4 states are announcing charges against you. Fraud, identity theft, money laundering, conspiracy. And in a few hours, the FBI will add federal charges to the list. Your contacts cannot save you. Your money cannot save you. Your web of lies cannot save you. Sloane stared at the phone. Her hands were shaking. Oh, and one more thing. Elena leaned closer. Brad already flipped on you. Again. He is in custody right now, giving them everything. Names, accounts, transactions. He is trading you for a reduced sentence. He would not. He already did. You taught him well. Self-preservation above everything. Sloane's composure shattered completely. Her face twisted with rage and fear. You think you have won? She hissed. I have people. I have resources. I will destroy you. Elena stood, placing money on the table for her untouched coffee. You came from my family, she said, her voice steady. You helped kill my son by teaching Brad that his affairs mattered more than his child. You destroyed my marriage, my reputation, my life. She leaned down, her face inches from Sloane's. But you have forgot one thing. I was not always a housewife. I was a litigator, and I never, ever forget. She straightened and picked up her bag. Here is your choice, Sloane. You can wait for the FBI to come for you. Or you can run. But we both know they will find you. They always do. Elena walked out of the restaurant without looking back. 24 hours later, Sloane Hartley was arrested at JFK Airport, attempting to board a flight to Dubai. The footage was everywhere. The perfectly dressed woman, now disheveled and desperate, being led away in handcuffs. The mugshot that showed a face stripped of all its careful masks. Elena watched the coverage from her father's living room, surrounded by the people who had helped her fight. Marcus sat in his favorite chair, still recovering but growing stronger every day. Rachel stood by the window, finally able to stop looking over her shoulder. Margaret sat on the couch, tears streaming down her face as she watched the woman who had destroyed her life finally face justice. "It is over," Margaret whispered. "It is really over." "Not quite," Marcus said. "There is still Brad." Brad Crawford was sentenced 2 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, victims, curious spectators. Elena sat in the front row, her face expressionless, as the judge read the charges. 15 years for financial fraud, money laundering, and child endangerment. Brad was led away in chains, a broken man in an orange jumpsuit, his expensive suits and arrogant smile nothing but memories. But before he was taken from the courtroom, Elena made sure to catch his eye. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply met his gaze and held it until he looked away. He would spend the next 15 years remembering what he had done, remembering the night his son died, calling for him while he lay in bed with another woman. That was enough. That was justice. Marcus waited until Brad's sentencing was complete before making his own moves. The first visit was to Diane Crawford. Brad's mother answered the door of her Upper East Side apartment, looking smaller than Marcus remembered. The social destruction had begun immediately after Elena filed her lawsuits. Diane had been dropped from every committee, removed from every charity board, shunned by the people she had spent her life impressing. "Colonel Holden," she said coldly, "I do not believe we have anything to discuss. Actually, we do." Marcus stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "You knew about Brad's affairs. You covered for him. When Elena came to you crying, you told her she was imagining things. A wife's job is to hold her marriage together. A grandmother's job is to protect her grandchild. And you failed." Marcus placed a folder on her antique table. "This is a press release going out tomorrow to every society page in Manhattan. It details how the Crawford family enabled a serial fraudster, covered up Brad's crimes, and conspired to frame an innocent woman." "You cannot," Diane whispered. "I already have. I have also made a donation to the Manhattan Social Registry's charity gala. In exchange, they are publishing a special insert about families who enable abuse. Your name features prominently." Diane stared at him, her face gray. "You taught Brad that appearances matter more than truth," Marcus said. "Now you will learn what happens when the truth finally comes out." He left without another word. Diane Crawford sold her apartment within the month and moved to a place where no one knew her name. The second visit was to Brad himself. Marcus used his remaining government contacts to arrange a meeting at the federal detention facility. He sat across from his former son-in-law in a gray interrogation room, watching the broken man who had once been so confident. "If you are here to gloat," Brad said weakly, "I am here to make sure you understand something." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Evan's last word was daddy. He called for you while his lungs filled with fluid, while his heart stopped, while his mother held him and begged him to hold on." "I did not know he was that sick," Brad whispered. "You did not care. That is worse. You saw Elena calling, you read her messages, you knew something was wrong, and you silenced your phone so you could finish with your mistress." Brad's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion Marcus had ever seen from him. "Your career is gone," Marcus continued. "Your money is gone. Your mother's reputation is destroyed. Your freedom is gone for the next 15 years. He stood, straightening his jacket. "But here is what you will carry for the rest of your life. Every night when you close your eyes, you will see his face. You will hear him calling for you, and you will know that you could have saved him, but you chose her." Marcus walked to the door. Brad was sobbing now, ugly broken sobs that echoed off the concrete walls. "Live with that," Marcus said without turning back. "Forever." The door slammed shut behind him. The final visit was to Sloan. She had been transferred to a federal prison after her sentencing. 47 years across multiple jurisdictions. No possibility of parole. She would die behind bars. Marcus sat across from her in the visitor's room, watching as she tried to maintain her composure. She was wearing orange now, her perfect hair limp, her manicured nails gone. The mask had been stripped away completely. "You think you have won," she said. "Yes, I have connections. I have resources. You have nothing. Marcus placed a folder on the table between them. Every contact you thought you had has been informed of your real identity. Every person who owed you favors has been shown evidence of your previous crimes. Every escape route you might have imagined has been sealed. There has to be something, Sloane whispered. There is not. Marcus stood. You targeted my family because you thought I was just a retired old man with money. You thought my daughter was a soft target you could destroy. He leaned down, his voice barely above a whisper. You miscalculated. I am a man who spent 30 years learning patience, and my patience is very, very long. He walked to the door. Enjoy your next 47 years, Miss Mitchell. I will make sure every single one of them is exactly as lonely as you deserve. He left her alone, finally understanding that there was no escape, no hope, no future, only the consequence of everything she had done. 1 month later, Elena sat in a doctor's office, staring at the woman in the white coat who had just changed her life. Congratulations, the doctor said warmly. You are pregnant, about 12 weeks along. Elena's hand went to her stomach. Shock flooded through her, followed by confusion, then a dawning realization that made her gasp. 12 weeks. That is before everything happened. Before Evan died, yes. The doctor nodded gently. You conceived this baby before any of it started. Elena sat in stunned silence. A baby. A new life growing inside her while her world fell apart. A piece of the future she had not known was possible. She did the mental math. The timing was right. The last time she and Brad had been together before everything unraveled. Before the night Evan died. Before she discovered the truth. This baby was Evan's sibling, a connection to her lost son that she had never imagined. Is everything okay? The doctor asked. You look overwhelmed. I am. Elena laughed through sudden tears. I just was not expecting this. I understand your circumstances have been difficult. If you need to discuss your options. No, Elena shook her head firmly. I want this baby. More than anything. The doctor smiled. Then we will make sure you get the best possible care. Elena drove to her father's house in a daze. Marcus was in the garden, moving slowly but steadily, his recovery progressing well. He took one look at her face and set down his pruning shears. What happened? He asked. Elena told him. When she finished, Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then his face softened in a way she had not seen since she was a little girl. A grandchild, he said quietly. Another one. Yes. He pulled her into his arms, holding her the way he had held her when she was small and scared and believed her father could fix anything. This is a gift, Elena, he said. After everything you have been through, everything you have lost, this is a gift. I know. She pressed her face against his shoulder. I am going to name her Hope. Hope? Because that is what she is. That is what Evan gave me, even when I thought I had nothing left. Hope for the future. 3 months later, Elena stood in the Evan Crawford Memorial Garden. It was a beautiful space, funded by the settlement, money recovered from Brad and Sloane's accounts. Flowering trees lined the paths. Benches overlooked a small pond. In the center stood a memorial stone inscribed with her son's name. Elena touched her growing belly as she read the inscription. Evan Marcus Crawford, beloved son, forever remembered, forever loved. The bravest boy I ever knew. Marcus stood beside her, leaning on his cane but strong. Rachel was there too, freed from Sloane's threats after the arrest. Margaret had come from Pennsylvania to see the garden that had grown from her years of patient record-keeping. 4 people bound together by tragedy and triumph. You are going to have a little sister, Evan, Elena said softly to the memorial stone. I am naming her Hope, because that is what you gave me, even when I thought I had nothing left. He would be proud of you, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. You did not give up. I could not. I made him a promise. Rachel put an arm around her shoulders. And now you get to start over. Elena nodded slowly. Yes, but it is different this time. Different how? Before I was starting over for someone else. For Brad, for the marriage I thought I wanted, for the life I thought I was supposed to have. She looked around at the garden, at her father, at her friend, at the woman who had become an unexpected ally. This time, I am starting over for me, and for the 2 children who made me a mother, the one I lost, and the one who is coming. The garden dedication ceremony had ended hours ago, but Elena stayed. She sat on a bench overlooking the pond, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Her father had gone home to rest. Rachel had returned to her family. Margaret had begun the drive back to Pennsylvania, lighter than Elena had ever seen her. Elena was alone with her thoughts, and for the first time in months, they were peaceful. She thought about the past year, about Evan, about Brad, about Sloane, about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. They say time heals everything, she murmured to herself. But that is not true. Time just gives you distance. Healing is a choice you make every single day. She stood, her hand resting on her belly where hope was growing. I lost my son, she continued, speaking to the empty garden, to the sunset, to Evan's memory. I lost my marriage. I lost myself for years in a life that was never mine. But I found something in the ashes, the woman I was always meant to be. She walked toward the garden entrance, pausing at Evan's memorial stone. My father taught me that revenge is not about anger. It is about balance, about making sure the people who hurt you can never hurt anyone else again. She touched the stone gently. Brad will spend 15 years remembering what he did. Sloane will spend the rest of her life paying for her crimes. And I get to start over. She looked up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. This time, I'm not starting over for someone else. I am starting over for me. And for the two children who made me a mother, the one I lost and the one who is coming. She started walking toward the parking lot, toward her car, toward the future. Then she stopped, turned back one last time. I love you, Evan, she whispered. Always. A butterfly landed on the memorial stone, its wings catching the last light of the setting sun. It stayed for a moment, as if delivering a message. Then it flew away, rising toward the stars. Elena watched it go. Then she smiled, placed her hand on her belly, and walked forward into her new life. 4 months later, on a sunny morning in July, Hope Evan Crawford was born. She had her mother's eyes and her brother's smile. She was healthy, she was strong, she was perfect. Elena held her daughter in the hospital room, surrounded by the people who loved her. Marcus sat in the chair beside the bed, tears streaming down his weathered face. Rachel stood by the window, taking photographs for the baby book she had already started. Welcome to the world, Hope, Elena whispered. You have a big brother watching over you from somewhere very special. The baby yawned and snuggled closer to her mother's chest. And Elena Crawford, who had lost everything and rebuilt it from the ashes, finally understood what it meant to be whole. 1 year later, Elena stood at the entrance to the Evan Crawford Memorial Garden, watching families walk the paths she had helped create. The garden had become more than a memorial. It had become a support center for families of children with heart conditions. 300 families had found help there in the past year. Counseling, financial assistance, medical referrals, community. Something good had grown from something terrible. Elena carried Hope on her hip, pointing out the flowers and the butterflies and the pond where ducks swam in lazy circles. See that stone over there? Elena said. That is your big brother. He was the bravest boy I ever knew. Hope babbled something incomprehensible and reached for a passing butterfly. Elena laughed and kissed her daughter's head. She thought about Brad, rotting in prison, haunted by his choices. She thought about Sloane, alone in her cell, stripped of everything she had taken from others. She thought about her father, healthy now, spending his retirement spoiling his granddaughter and tending the garden that bore his grandson's name. She thought about Evan, about his smile, about his laugh, about the way he called her mommy and asked if he would get better. You did get better, baby, she whispered. Not the way I hoped, but in a different way. You are part of something beautiful now, something that helps other families, something that will last. A young mother approached Elena hesitantly. She looked exhausted, terrified, the way Elena had looked a lifetime ago. Excuse me, the woman said. Are you Elena Crawford? Someone told me you might be able to help. My son was just diagnosed with a heart condition, and I do not know what to do. Elena smiled. Come inside, she said. Let me tell you a story. It starts with a brave little boy who taught me that love is stronger than loss. And as she led the young mother into the garden, Elena understood at last. Grief does not end, but it can transform. Pain does not disappear, but it can become purpose. And love, real love, never dies. It just changes shape.